Yo, yo, my name is Big Lou, and you're now listening to Go Produce. We're the show that explores how music industry professionals turn their passions into profit. If you're curious to learn how an artist has developed his ear so well that it got him working with a popular Canadian band, then this episode is for you. All right. Thank you, Factor, for funding part of this initiative. Today's theme is musical and technical knowledge is a must. How do you hear what trained ears don't hear as an artist? Our guest for today is Mr. Tokyo Spears. Tokyo Spears is one of the members of Walk Off the Earth, a Canadian indie pop band from Burlington, Ontario. The group is known for its music videos of covers and originals. He does production, mixing, recording, and songwriting. He has the ability to hear things that you would not pick up on unless you are incredibly trained. Oh, and of course, he is our best friend-engineer. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you Tokyo Spears.
Hey, everyone.
That was super awesome. Thank you so much, Tokyo, for being here. I want you to know that we very much do appreciate your time, so let's make the most of this and go produce, yes?
Absolutely, man.
All right, so starting it off nice and strong, we've got the basics.
The basics.
Oh, baby. I love that sound. It gets me going. Starting off with the basics, we want to get everyone on the same page with you so that we can move through this experience together as one. Cool?
Into it.
Beautiful. Tokyo, what's your first musical memory?
First musical memory. Maybe when I was quite young, getting a set of bongos that I don't even remember getting. I only remember I got them because there was a picture of me getting them. So my first memory is a recycled memory of just a tiny dollar store set of bongos. That was it. No actual performance memory.
Yeah. Okay. So did you figure out later on what the story was behind the bongos? Why did you receive a pair of bongos as opposed to anything else?
No, man. No story. Just my mom was like, yo, I found this picture of you getting bongos. And I was like, cool. And I'm just sitting with a bunch of people watching me playing these. So it must have been some event, but I was 7 or 6 or something. But I was like, cool, I have these.
Yeah. Leave me be. I've got my bongos. I like that a lot. And then did you find that you experimented with a lot of different kind of atypical instruments because of that?
That might have just been from homeschooling, actually. I grew up homeschooled, and I was pretty free reign, so I was able to kind of jump onto different instruments quite a bit, and I think that might have had a lot to do with it, in fact.
Very cool. Interesting. Experimenting. What is the first lesson that the industry has taught you?
Jeez. The first lesson the
Take a breather
industry has taught me, the music industry specifically.
Yes.
And if you see me jittering around, it's because I'm actually balancing on a yoga ball right now. So if I fall over and just deke, it's because I'm on a ball right now.
I promise I won't laugh too hard.
Yeah, but you can laugh a little bit. You got the soundboard there for you.
Perfect.
That's what the soundboard's for. First industry memory might have been, first industry fact that it really stuck out to me.
Yeah, lesson.
Was, I think, it's a bit counterintuitive. I think it's that formal training is not for everyone, and how so many people think, well, if you want to get this job, you have to go to this school and you have to do this and this and this, and so many people I meet in the industry are you know what, I couldn't do the music school thing. I had to just go and learn it and do it myself. And then often so many other people that have done the same kind of thing where they've just learned to DIY, they're yeah, do you you don't have to go to music school to make it. And that's true. But what I've learned in the industry is that so many prerequisites of the industry are based on the foreknowledge of what you learn at school. And it's the little things in the background that you learn in a formal institution you don't realize you need until the very second you need it. And someone's well, what does that mean if 3% on pub? And you're and then the guy that learned that was oh, well, that means this. And so that's what I learned really fast. Is exactly what I learned really quick was what my formal training gave me versus what I have to learn on the fly. So it's not exactly intuitive but that was the biggest thing. I was wow, I'm really glad I went to this school for this moment right now.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because we do have the conversation with other guests. We have some professors, we have students of the game, if you will,
Right.
and everyone has a different approach. And it is interesting to see that, you will gain little knacks of wisdom by literally just being in the environment and spending time with these people because there
Yeah.
is probably a reason that they're sharing this with you. It likely happened to them in the past.
Yeah.
And it's up to you as the individual to absorb that. That being said, you can learn on the fly as well. And you did
Exactly.
make that differentiation.
Yeah. And like that's kind of the biggest thing I learned is that you need to have 100%. You need to have both. You need to be not 100%, but most of the time you'll need to have both. It's like you'll need to learn that base level training from something. Just take an online course or something, and then you can go and learn on the fly because things have changed since that course came out. And then those two things together will really cut you through.
Things are always changing, like
Yeah.
especially within this industry, hey?
Oh, 100%.
So it's constantly learning. Cool. After having spent all of this time in the industry, what firsts are you pursuing now, personally?
What am I first pursuing right now? I'm pursuing. Actually, it's hilarious. And yeah, you and or Grumpy Sound God will laugh at me for this, or Andrew in the background if he's watching. But I'm relearning Logic Pro X. So I had learned it in school, and I did pretty well. I had good classes and good grades and stuff. But that was Logic 8 or 9 or something at the time, and I just it was kind of like the little brother of Pro Tools. It was like Logic's awesome to make beats, or like just like FL Studio or Fruity Loops at the time,
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. But then when you want to get, when you want to graduate and you want to go track some bands in a studio, you got to rent Pro Tools. So I was like, I'm gonna learn Pro Tools. I'm gonna just get like nail down Pro Tools. And so I learned it and I nailed it down and I used it for like the last 7 years or whatever. And then like everyone in all these different like project studios are running Logic. I'm like, okay, I gotta relearn Logic. So I just been like trying to do demos and stuff in Logic only, or just in Ableton or things like that, just like to push myself and like relearn all that new stuff. So 10.4.1 or whatever, the newest one came out, and I was like, okay, this is like, I want to relearn it on this. That way I can get like the live loops and happening and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, like right now the thing I'm bent on learning is like mastering from a couple of different people because I'm not a mastering engineer and never will be. But because time permits, or I should say time doesn't permit it, we can't always send music to mastering.
Right.
So like, let's say there's a quick change, I have to do the mastering. So like often I'll end up doing mastering for the majority of the songs, and that I myself or some other people make, and I'm like I'm done with not knowing what I'm doing. Like, so I went and, one of my buddies hooked me up with a program, so I'm learning that now.
Yeah.
But aside from that, Logic is like, I'm so slow compared to some of these dudes, and I'm like, this is so painful for my ego right now.
It's so much. It's a steep learning curve, and I wonder, it's probably a little bit easier since you have the experience with Pro Tools and Fruity Loops, but it's still a whole beast of its own.
Oh yeah, and it's such an amazing program, and like I actually in my heart have like such a soft spot for Logic and also for like Bitwig and just like DAWs that are like cheaper, that have perpetual licensing, that you don't have to keep buying over and over again, that can run video at the same time without crashing. Like just the most base level things you think every DAW should have, and yet Pro Tools struggles with them so hard. You're just like, man, come on. And like the new Ableton just came out with comping for the finally.
Yeah.
So now Ableton 11 will be able to comp tracks like every other DAW, meaning that it's finally and officially a DAW. Things like that, like those things we got to keep in mind. If you're like married to one workstation, you're like, man, you can't think that way.
What do you mean finally officially a DAW? Is there like prerequisites to make it a DAW?
It's this whole ongoing debate, like that Ableton Live was supposed to be a live program, and like initially it was designed to be a live performance software, and only over the years, over 10 iterations technically, has it become more and more of what people would consider a digital audio workstation, where you can actually mix in it, you can actually produce in it, and like automation came in, and like all this kind of stuff was added to Ableton as it got older. I think automation might have started there, like at the first iteration, whatever. But whatever the case, as as it matured, people were like, this is a workstation. And like, for example, that same question got exacerbated even more when Luna came out, because then because UAD themselves, Universal Audio, tried to convince people that it's not a DAW.
Right.
Right? They're like, this is an ecosystem, it's environment. And to some degree, they're right. A lot of the features you would look for in a DAW aren't there. And it's because they don't have to be if it's not a DAW. It's like
That's
if you
true.
buy a car and there's 2 wheels, and half a windshield. They're like, I didn't sell you a car. I sold you this other thing. they're like, I guess if you don't call it a car, you don't have to be held to a car standard. So
That's a good point.
so you have to keep that kind of thing in mind. And so like now the question is friggin' closed. Like if you have comping and you have these other like what you call pillars of a workstation, then you can't really excuse yourself from the rest of it, right?
Very interesting. Very interesting. That is a wrap up of the basics.
That was
a
not
lot
basic at
smarter
all.
already.
You might have to cut all that out because it's not basic, but
Exactly, not so basic. Like a little bit mind blown already, but we're off to a great start. Moving on, we've got our next segment. Our next segment is What's Yo Take?
I feel so triumphant with that music.
He's on point here with it. Normally, he makes a couple of mistakes, and I try to make fun of him, but he's doing well today.
Not
Thank
too
you, Grumpy Sound
today.
Guy.
Well done.
Spot on. What's Your Take, Tokyo, is going to be me throwing 3 different points at you that are perhaps semi-ridiculous, and I just want your perspective.
Okay.
Cool. Getting song covers to go viral is a simple science. What's your take?
False.
False. Why?
Because it used to be easier before the algorithm implementation in YouTube. Specifically YouTube we're talking about.
Okay.
But the algorithm changed that because now if you're subscribed to someone, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see what they post. And if you're not subscribed to someone, the algorithm will decide for you what you want to see. So it's kind of just takes the end user's hands off the wheel. So now it's up to a computer to decide what you'll like. And that computer algorithm is based on an ever-evolving set of factors. So it could be your previous clicks, your interests, your click rate, the amount of time you're spending on a video, the amount of time, your retention on that video. If you're watching it for more than 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes, then ads can change because you can have multiple mid-roll ads, and that will change the way that algorithms push that video, because that means that ad companies will be more interested in putting ads on your video because you can put 3 times more or twice as much.
Right.
So so all that kind of thing has to be kept in mind if you want to make a viral video, because you have to be like, well, do I want my video to be really popular with marketing? Because then that will give it an extra boost, because then ad money will be behind it, or Google will put more push behind it. Do I have enough of a base of subscribers with notifications on? Because that will mean that the notification might pop up. But even notifications aren't all notifications. It's either personalized or all. So it's not simple.
It's not so actually releasing the song itself isn't simple either, but even recording the song has its own challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What kind of challenges do you experience with that?
Well, those everyone knows once they get into the recording process. But it's just a little more specific when you do it, the way that we tend to do it. So the number one issue is isolation, right? Like isolating parts, trying to get parts to be as like uniquely recorded as possible, or have as little bleed as possible, so you can, turn it up or mix it or change it or tweak it or pitch it or tune it or things like that. So like that's kind of the hardest part.
Yeah. And then when you're actually doing it live for the video itself, you said that it could take on average 50 times. How much time does that usually translate into?
To perform,
not necessarily in front of other people, but when you're preparing the videos.
Right. It depends. Like, so, not to speak for the rest of them, but when they're prepping to do one, it's like it can be a day or 2 ahead of the shoot day of prep. So if it's a really hard one, a couple days of just training to do it. Like, for example, one of the ones we did recently, the drummer Joel and me made an Excel spreadsheet and split up the entire, like every hand for every 16th note in a 16 bar chunk for the verse, a 16 bar chunk for the chorus, and a 16 bar chunk for the pre-chorus, and then
Wow.
assigned, because we know that if you have two hands, you can only do two things at once, right? Plus vocal, so you have 3 items to be added to the repertoire of that,
Right.
of that 1/16th note. So we go 1/16th note at a time and say, like, this bell left hand Joel, this bell right hand Johnny, this bell left hand Sarah, this and this. Johnny can't do anything for this 4 bars because he's playing the ukulele. The next 4 bars, his ukulele is passed over to this person. It means he has 2 new hands, but now this person's 2 hands are not available. And you just go through the entire song, assigning 1 hand at a time, 1/16th note at a time.
Is that your role? Like, do you take that role on?
Me and Joel for sure.
You and Joel?
Yeah.
And how serious about this? Like, how much of a perfectionist are you with these takes? Because you're measuring out 16ths, so when the video comes around, that's probably like precise.
That's all. That's all for rehearsal only.
Okay.
So like once the part has been written out,
Yeah.
like that. And again, this is only for parts that are really, really, really interactive. So
Okay.
for example, if I have to take this cup, and then 3 other people have to take that same cup, then every 16th note has to be assigned. Otherwise, 2 hands will grab that cup. Right. So, and then once you listen to that, like we try to listen to just our part over and over and over again in solo. So
Right.
all the places where your hands are, that part is like 20 dB louder.
Right.
And then you
For
just
each
go into a
individual,
room.
yeah.
Into a room, and you listen to that for like a day. You're just
Yeah.
like, and it sounds like pure nonsense. It's just like, yeah. And it's like the weirdest, like, non-musical part ever. So
Yeah.
what we try to do, or like what they're really good with, is like reorganizing parts to make it a little bit more musical, so it's easier to remember.
Right.
So like I'll just write the most technical thing because like it's technically right. Like your hand should be here. You should do this. And then someone will come back like, I can't play this. This is like, okay. like
No rhythm to it, yeah.
no rhythm to it. So then we'll tool it around and like swap this person's hands so it's like like it's more of a thing.
Yeah.
So that takes a couple iterations, but once you get everyone's parts done, the small changes, like the 10% that has to change in the day because of like no one realized that my shoulder's too far forward for that person to reach at that one hit, or like the person has to reach underneath someone else and they're too short, so we have to put sandbags in the ground to make them an inch taller. Just like the tiniest changes get changed the day of. But, you know, not to give the secrets away. I mean, that's not a secret.
Yeah.
It's just inches of sandbags. But you get the idea. That kind of stuff gets figured out more or less like the day of. But the minority, like the 90% of it is figured out ahead of time, if possible. Sometimes it's just we just jump in and do it in the same day. But that's a stressful
See what
day.
happens.
That's a stressful day.
Who comes up with the instruments to use?
Depends. Often the group receives stuff from all kinds of other like companies, so they might reach out and say like, "Hey, we have this new Nouveau J sax, like this plastic saxophone," and so we'll receive a saxophone in the mail, and we're like, so then myself or someone else will be like, "How do you play this thing?" And then we'll try to figure it out. I'm usually the one with the most time, so I'm usually the one learning how to play instruments at least at a very base level. Like when I say learn, I mean learn one thing on one instrument. So it's like, can you play this one part on this instrument?
Right.
That's all that I really need to learn, right? Or that's all that someone else would have to learn. So then I'll try to learn this one part on an instrument and be like, okay, I'll just go over that for a few hours and do that one single part, and then say like, dude, can you play this? And they'll be like, okay. And then they'll go over it for a while, and then they're like, okay, I can play this one part. It's, you know, you shouldn't be assuming that I can play every instrument, because I've heard that before and it's absolute not true. I can play one thing on many instruments.
But it works. It works. And there's an art as well to putting that puzzle together, you know?
Absolutely.
Very cool. Is that your favorite cup? Does that cup make a lot of features in your videos?
This one? No, this is just my mom makes cups sometimes. This isn't one of hers, but usually at home I have a bunch of her own pottery that I try to to drink of. So because I'm not close to home. I'm out in Hamilton, and I grew up in Quebec. So
Quebec,
little
yeah.
reminders to call my mom or things like that. You know.
I hear you. My mom's not in the country either. Speaking of covers, do you think song covers are the best way to generate momentum for artists or bands?
That's a great question. I mean, that one would be better answered by someone in the band who has a better view of that from a bird's eye. But
Right.
from what I've gleaned, it's really hard for a new band to get momentum when there's such an oversaturated market of songs that are always being released, like
Yeah.
every Friday, right? New release Friday, just like this massive wave of a mix of the
Everything.
the most grassroots bands that just got a Spotify like account, and the biggest pop bands there are today, like BTS. You could have BTS drop a song at the same time as Stevie and the Johnstone group or whatever down the street, and like you have to fight against that in the same area, because it's set up by Release Canada or New Music Friday, whatever, the countrywide or area wide. So like if you're stuck in the same area as someone else who's releasing something huge around the same time, you have to find clever ways to kind of compensate for that. And so a cover is a really good way for people to care about what you're doing without realizing that they're caring about your band by accident. So like if you make a cover of a song that just came out, or just a classic song or something like that people will have a draw to, then like for example, Ghostbusters movie's coming out soon, right? The new one.
Yep.
With that dude from Stranger Things.
Yeah.
That's terrible, I know. It's got a cool name, I just can't remember it right now.
Yeah, same.
So
Finn Wolfhard.
Thank you, Finn. Finn actually ends up in a lot of the Pup music videos. Friggin' love Pup growing up, and like now I don't know how they ended up pals, but like every time I see Finn in a Pup video, I'm like, how are these worlds colliding? I want to be part of that world. Anyway, so the new Ghostbusters movie's coming out. Let's say you, Louis, like you come out with a cover of the Ghostbusters theme song.
Yeah.
Right, by what's his name, Ray something, and then like that video's coming out, so you have time to prep it to make it sound really good before the release, and then like a couple weeks before it pops up, you come up with that song under your own artist name, but it's a cover, right? Then people searching just for that might find your name, and they weren't looking for you specifically because they don't care about you because they don't know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
But that cover shows up, they're like, oh, listen to it, and if it's sick, if your cover slaps, then people are like, who is this guy? So it's a fast way to get people into what you're doing.
Do you think the best approach would be to look for classic songs to cover or new songs similar to what you just described?
Depends on the kind of clientele you're looking for, the kind
Fair.
of like subscriber you're looking for. If you're looking for subs that are just like quick and short attention span kind of people, which is a lot, which has tons of viral, capability, but not so much like longevity, then just really quick covers. Don't produce it hard. Don't work too hard on it. Just get it out. Throw ozone on the master. just blast it out, and then make volume over perfection. Because then you're going to be able to get faster releases with a attention span, like a shorter attention span, and a very specific kind of clientele or kind of sub. If you're looking for doing something classier or something that has longevity, then classic songs or songs that don't really have a time frame are obviously the best choice, because by the time you release it, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
Like it's not like you releasing a cover of Backstreet's Back is going to matter right now when you do it, if it's this month or next month, right? It's going to be still Backstreet Boys, and it's still going to have this built-in audience. Right. You're like, guys, I made a Backstreet Boys cover, and it's coming out next year, and everyone's like, cool.
It's true. That's a good way to differentiate between. So maybe perhaps a nice balance. You've got to do your due diligence, find out what's coming out, what you want to be attached to, if you will, what your style can fit in, and then also play with some classics, if at all you want to do the cover thing.
Yeah, and I mean, this is just what I've gleaned from doing this kind of weird thing that I'm doing right now.
Yeah. Awesome. We did touch on a little bit about the Pokemon Journey song, but that wasn't so much a cover. But what's your take on writing music for video games and for advertising is what is most lucrative currently? What's your take on that?
So we co-wrote that one on the road. So that one was a pretty modular song. Like, it was written in the back of tour buses. It was recorded partly in Australia. It was like in in my buddy's basement. It was recorded in the back of the bus with this microphone and that console, like the Apollo, just like with the engine running. Like, it was recorded in hotels everywhere and written everywhere. So like, you really have to put that into consideration as well. Like, the Pokemon team was one of the coolest, one of the best organizing member. I don't know like what their name is or the Inc. or whatever, but the group that we were talking to at Pokemon were some of the coolest, most chill people ever. They're like, yeah, man, that sounds good. Do whatever you want. It's like, let's send like a demo like that I'm producing in the back room or something, and G's producing, and then they're like, I have like no confidence because it's Pokemon, right? I send it. They're like, sounds great. Yeah. I love it. Keep going. I was like, really?
That's awesome. Like, okay. That's so cool.
To answer your question, like, it completely depends. It's entirely dependent on the song and on the time and like what your schedule has right now at that point.
That's a good point. And it's funny how when you were recording it, you were moving around, so it really was a journey. I just wanted to point that out.
Never thought about that, but you're right.
Yes. Beautiful, beautiful. Tokyo, we've got our final segment for today. This segment is called Clear the Air.
All right.
Yes. All right, Tokyo. In Clear the Air, it doesn't smell in here, but what we're going to do is I'm going to throw you 3 different kind of topics, and essentially we're trying to learn from your past experiences here specifically.
All right.
The first part of this segment is going to be featuring a guest question. So I'm going to show that to you. Can you just speak 1 second so I can see your picture again?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So I'm going to show you a guest video with a couple of questions here, okay?
Sure.
Hi, Tokyo. I've got 3 questions for you. My first question is, what is a live performance that you were particularly excited or nervous for?
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do that one first.
So, a live performance that I was particularly nervous for was, I was blessed to be part of the live show when we did Royal Albert Hall.
Royal Albert Hall. Where's that?
In London, England. So the Royal Albert Hall is like this insane venue where like some of the biggest bands in all history have played, and like just the possibility of playing in that same room where Queen played and like all these huge bands played some of their some of their climactic, like career-changing shows. I was like, I don't deserve to be playing on this stage right now.
Come on.
So that was pretty nerve-wracking.
Yeah, very
and
cool.
Also because the stage was tiny and the pyro was like really, really close to the stage part. So like if I reach my arm out too far, the pyro guy wouldn't turn it on, and then everyone would be like, "Why isn't the pyro going off?" And it'd be like my fault. So I was like standing right here, like playing the pyro.
Don't move.
Don't move. And then
that's awesome.
And the fire was so close, you could feel it, man. You could feel that heat. I was like,
your hair singeing a little bit.
Well, not singeing. They did a great job.
That's awesome.
But definitely hot.
Yes. Here is our second question. This is from Ben Switzer. I didn't introduce him at all. Ben Switzer. Question number 2.
All right, Ben.
And my follow-up question is, what was a very challenging cover video for you to capture in the past?
Challenging cover video to capture. I'm going to think about that one first. I'm going to think about that one for a second. There was one called Hey Ya a while back. That one was extremely challenging. That was like the floorboards were bouncy, and like every time you step, the camera would shake. So we had to put camera like squishy
like to absorb shock absorber almost?
Yeah, we had to like literally like floor scrubber squishies that we bought, put it underneath every tripod. We had to put sandbags. We had to like the most crazy set. We had to put mics in complete different places. The instruments had to be brought out of the room, brought back in. Had to be like rigging wires with pulleys to pull things into stage and back out again. There was like cables attached to amps as counterweights, so the amp gets slid over, so the sign comes down, and someone else remote turns it on and turns it back off, and the amp slides back, and then the cello moves over, and then goes underneath, and everything has to be
There's
passed
so much.
underneath the camera, which means it has to be like 2 feet off the ground. So you have to lie down and have the cello pass over you like this, so it doesn't touch the camera lens, and then
Come
get back up.
on.
Dude, it was insane. You have to run backstage at full speed. There wasn't even enough time to put your glove on, because we had to put gloves on for something. Puppets. So I had to just put my hands back, and someone else was there to run,
What?
put them on my hands when I'm not looking, and then run and jump. Like
That's awesome.
the most challenging.
The feats that you go
To
through for
date.
these videos.
Oh man, you should see the rest of them. I'm just
Maybe
talking
I'll hear
about me
about them
right
later.
now. Yeah,
We do
go
have
ahead.
one more quick question from him, and then we've got a couple clear the air from us. Cool?
Yeah.
And my final question is, how do you decide which song you're going to cover next? Thank you.
How to decide which cover to do next? That is entirely up to them. I'm
Right.
just the Frengineer. I'm just there
Right.
to do whatever they want, and if they're like, "Hey, I've been thinking about this song for a long time." Johnny is the main contributor to that particular thing. Like he'll usually have a couple ideas in mind, or he'll have looked up a bunch of different songs and or he'll just
We're doing
want to
this.
do something fun, just like we just did. What's Love Got to Do with It?
Ah, such a
And,
good
like,
song. I heard it.
And he was just like, I want to do this song. And I was like, man, just do it. Let's
Let's
just
do
with
it. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Alrighty, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Ben, for asking those questions. My questions for you are, how did you learn about signal change and hardwiring outboard gear together?
Great question. Signal chains and outboard gear. This is the kind of stuff I like talking about.
All
now,
right.
now you're talking my stuff here. The engineering side, I love it. So signal chains and outboard gear was all MIA for me. So that's where I never had touched musical gear before that program. I had never touched a console or even a microphone, really, other than like an SM57 on a stage, from being in a band. But really, the first time I ever touched audio gear was in school.
Wow.
So I was like so absorbed. I was so into it. So I learned on the SSL Duality and the Sony MXP3000 how to do, bantam to bantam gear, what's it called? Bantam to bantam inserts, right? For plugging in where plugins come from, plugging in external gear. So that's essentially like the things I miss most, in fact, is plugging in that external gear. Not because it's practical, because it's not because it's fast, because it's certainly not, but because once you plug all that stuff in, you now have this tactile connection to the song you're working on. And there's something really what's the word I'm looking for?
Grumpy.
Transcendent. That's the word I'm looking for.
Transcendent.
There's
Cool.
something really transcendent about grabbing gear physically and then moving the song or moving parts of the song while you're listening to it, right? Because you're no longer just receiving like basically airwaves into your ears, but you're now touching those airwaves. And it's not the same when you grab a plug-in or something like that. It's something really, really haptic about doing it with your hands. So that's one thing that I really do love is that signal flow. You're physically putting in the signal, right? You're not just like routing it digitally or whatever.
Right. But in MIA, they don't really teach the inner workings of the outboard gear. How did you dive further into that world?
I dove to some degree further into that. If we're talking about schematics now, I had already been a bit of an electrical. I had gone to school for 2.5 years before that as a mechanical engineer, so I wasn't going to be into music at all. Music was a afterthought of me quitting my mechanical engineering program. But I had already been in electrical engineering as well. Electrical was part of my program. So it wasn't super hard to jump into the technical side of the engineering at MIA, because I would already recognize a lot of the schematics and stuff if I happened to be looking at one. I was like, oh, okay, this is the signal flow of this particular plugin, or this is signal flow of this particular outboard gear. So it definitely did help a lot. That's kind of where I got it from.
Interesting. And in the group, Walk Off the Earth, if they don't have a person like you that's like fully engaged with them all the time, who takes on that role?
Johnny G does that. He's an amazing engineer. He's an awesome ear. He has been mixing all their stuff before me, so he does, and on all the recording and all that stuff. So it's a really, really good working relationship. Like with and he'll jump in often, actually quite often.
Yeah,
more than people realize. Like when I'm working on something and I'm like, I don't know really about this thing, or like what we'll have is like a sit-in. Like I'll get the engineering and the production stuff and the mix or whatever to a certain point, and then he'll jump in and do the rest of it, and then I'll jump back in and just go back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Or like I'll mix something, and I know you've gotten to this before, is like where you get to a point in the mix where you just give up. I'm just like, I don't know what I'm listening to anymore. I can't tell if this is a good mix. I can't tell if it's a bad mix. So I'm like, I take my hands off and I'm like, I'm out. And then like G will come in and like, why is this bass like 6 dB too quiet? And like turn it up. Or like, why is this synth there? So take it out. And I'm like, oh, this sounds great.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you just need some time to escape and then come back into
exactly. So if I wasn't there, this would all be happening regardless, 100%.
It has to happen. But I'm just
Exactly.
curious to see, because you obviously have a very interesting way and approach of doing it, and it does stand out. So I felt I should ask.
Well, thank you. If I stood
You're
out, it would still be happening.
That's fair. That's fair. The science of sound, all of what we just spoke about, engineering and whatnot, how does this play a role into composing?
Wow, the science of sound, how it plays into composition. Composition is, if you want to dissect it, just the inner workings or the inner modulation of certain frequencies, right? You have, a fifth, an octave, an S3rd octave, and then you have a power chord, or whatever the case, right? And or like a sub octave and a super octave. You have, those are just three different fundamental frequencies vibrating at mathematical intervals, and those mathematical intervals are perceived as sound, though the signal source and the signal path only perceives them as waveforms or as sources. So if you consider the signal flow of what we were talking about before, plugging in a piece of gear or putting on a plugin, you have to consider what that signal source contains when you're mixing. So for
Right.
example, if I record a power chord and I don't want this power chord to distort the same way as, the top lead line, if I want the power chord to intermodulate, then I might put less notes or more notes if I want to have a denser modulation or a denser cross modulation between those notes into an amp. Like if you play an entire chord, like a C major chord or a C diminished, whatever chord I was playing, if I played that chord,
Quack, quack.
yeah, if you played that chord into a heavily distorted amp, it's gonna sound really dense. Not wrong. And if it's perfectly in tune, it'll sound quite beautiful. But if it's even a little bit out of tune, that starts to have negative effects, because what you're getting is those fundamentals and harmonics are getting distorted and turning themselves up and then folding back down into your audible spectrum. And that's creating a really, really, really dense part to listen to, which is why most people, when they're heavily distorting guitars, they're using less notes. Now, you would do that kind of instinctively, but the science behind it is pretty interesting.
Yeah. When you say do it instinctively, it's almost the ear. You develop the ear and you can like hear that.
Yeah, like most people just think like, wow, like I don't want to play full chords through this through this Engel amp because it sounds kind of gross.
Right.
Because the ear says it's kind of gross, but it doesn't
Right.
know why. But the reason is because you're turning up all those harmonics to the same level or nearly the same level as the fundamentals. So now not only are you hearing fundamentals in a particular chord that was already dense to start off, you're now hearing all of each single note's harmonics, and those harmonic notes intermodulating or playing against each other and now being turned up to the same level as the fundamentals. Now you're just getting this huge sandwich of sound.
Mm-hmm.
So the brain doesn't say, there's too much harmonics in this, it sounds like garbage. It just says, this sounds like garbage.
Which makes sense. But that's where you're able to differentiate the two. I've heard a story before where you were sitting in a room working with individuals, and you're like, no, the modes are off in here, and the other engineers in the room couldn't really hear that. Firstly, can you describe to the listeners what a mode is and how you go about detecting this where others can't?
Where did you hear this story?
In a studio.
Wow, I don't even remember saying that, but I will pretend that I did and go on like I did.
Cool.
I guess I had said that sometime in the past. And by the way, I don't know if it's modes or nodes. Some people call them nodes. Some people call them modes. N as in Nancy and M as in Michael. I don't know what the difference is between them, if there are any differences, but shout out in the comments if you know.
Interesting, yeah.
But the difference is between those two, I don't know. But what I do know is when you go into a three-dimensional space, which is all spaces because we live in a three-dimensional world,
Yeah.
there are points of pressure, both of crest and troughs of pressure, in the area that you are sitting in that will change the way that air flows through that space. And specifically, notes. So if you take a sine wave and start sweeping from 20 to 20, right, you're going to find out that where you're sitting in a regular room, I'm not talking about a treater room here, a regular room, you'll just hear the changes between the amplitude. So as you sweep slowly, it might sound more like it'll never sound that consistent, only in headphones. It'll go
Whoa.
You'll hear those dropouts and those
Right.
amplitude, like the amplitude increasing and amplitude decreasing. So those are the nodes or the modes. It's basically just at that specific location where you're sitting.
Yes.
So let's say you're in the sweet spot, right? And you're going through a sweep by some reason of chance. You might just be like, I thought I had a note there. Or let's say there's a bass line. You're working on this really, really bass-heavy track. This specifically has to do with bass. Most like room acoustics are trying to treat bass as a reductive thing, as an absorbing bass, and high end as a spreading thing, as in kind of diffusing highs or mids, right? Absorbing highs can sometimes make the space kind of feel anechoic and almost uncanny, and that's not necessarily what you want in a really good mixing space. But for low end, absorption is kind of understood as the best kind of way to go forward. So if you have a regular room with very little absorption and regular diffusion, the most obvious problem you're going to have is like around that 160 hertz range, where you're going to have these waveforms clashing with each other and then phasing out. I mean, that's science. That's the science of what's happening, right? Like, let's say you have an audio gun and you blast a waveform, just a sinusoidal waveform at 80 hertz, and it hits that wall, a perfectly flat wall that's perfectly parallel to me. It's going to come right back to me, right? And 80 hertz is 80 cycles per second. 80 cycles per second is a certain amount of inches or whatever. I don't know but the speed of sound is what, 4,000 something or other. So
Quite
if you
quick.
multiply the speed of sound by the cycles per second, you get the inch length of that specific waveform. If you math it out, it's going to hit that wall, bounce back, and then whether or not it hits in phase with itself, right, or out of phase with itself, it'll either double in amplitude or phase and cancel out. So as you're sweeping that, the second you get to the 80 hertz, if that happened to be phase canceling at your distance, it's just going to sound like silence.
Yeah.
And then the second you get further, like 85 hertz, it's going to come
You'll
back
hear
into
it
the
again.
audible spectrum again, because it's just a little bit out of phase with itself, right?
Right.
And then it just keeps doing the same cycle as you go through the different, notes.
That's
every-
very cool.
Yeah, that's the very long-winded explanation of modes.
Awesome. We do have the grumpy sound guy. He can answer the difference between nodes and modes.
Yes, thank you.
It was actually pretty accurate what you just said. I just wanted to say that those two things are different. The modes, as you just said, are the frequency or the speed at which those sounds vibrate in the membrane, but the nodes are just those little points where there's no movement within the spectrum.
So the nodes of an N is no movement?
Exactly, as is in the end, and the modes are just like the general speed, like they move in those frequencies.
Perfect. So the modes was what I was looking for.
Right.
So the So when I said, I guess at some point, if at some point I said the modes are weird in this room or whatever I said there, it's probably because there was probably a bass line going and one of the notes disappeared.
Right.
That's probably what happened.
That's probably what happened.
Yeah.
Okay. Tokyo, just so you know, it is 11 o'clock. I've got one or two more questions unless you've got to run.
No, I'm good. I'm good till like 12:30 or so.
Okay, awesome. Okay, awesome.
I mean, no, sorry, 11:30 or so.
11:30. Yeah, we won't go that far anyway.
Yeah.
In terms of the sound science, how do you recommend young professionals understand this? Is it mainly through school? Because most people don't have engineering background, mechanical or electrical.
It depends on your willpower. 100% willpower. If you wanted to learn all this on your own, it's 2020, YouTube, Wikipedia, Reddit. Like there's no, there's really no way you couldn't learn that stuff if you wanted to. You just have to do your research, and no one's gonna. And there's a bunch of really good programs online, like on Skillshare, and like there's tons of stuff out there.
Yeah.
But it depends on how much you want to learn it. And then
The onus is on you.
Yeah, the onus is on you. It's easier to do it in a program that's organized all that information into a learning program, right? Otherwise known as a school. But but essentially, like if you just wanted to learn it and you were super hungry, you could.
It's not impossible.
It's not possible.
If there's a will, there's a way.
100%.
Okay. What about Walk Off the Earth drew you to them?
Well, they asked me to come and help out.
That's one way. Okay, were you a fan of theirs before?
I was. I mean, I'd seen some videos and stuff. When I was really young, I would cut up PVC pipes and make like tubulums, like the Blue Man Group style.
Yeah.
Because I'd sang the Blue Man Group when I was younger, and I was like, I want that. So we went to the hardware store, and me and my buddy Stevie just cut a bunch of these plastic tubes to the exact lengths, and then hit them with floppy flip flops. Thank you, flip flops.
Oh, okay.
To get that dum, and then we just built these like this instrument where you can just dum 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 dum, and that was like the first step to that sound that I liked. And then later, his mom bought a set of boom whackers. I was like, oh, these are so sick. This is exactly what we. Yeah, it's just like these tubes they're just hollow tubes, but they're cut where the fundamental ends up at a specific note when you hit them and they vibrate. So
Whoa.
It's basically a tubulum, but with impact on the side rather than the top. Difference being, if you close the top, it's an octave lower, but if you keep it open, it's an octave higher. We found out if you just hit it and close your hand over it, you actually extend the bass one octave lower. So we're like, dude, we can now play these instead of the tubulum. And then I saw some of these videos from these people on YouTube playing the boom whackers, and I was like, these are my kind of guys.
Huh.
And so that was my first, introduction to them.
Yeah, to them. And then what was it like coming into the band as a hired gun? Was there some kind of transition time, or like you had to understand the workflow of the band? How did that go?
Yeah, I mean, even today, I'm still technically a freelance hired gun. So the difference being that we have such an awesome relationship now that it's definitely like it's a family now, right? And I had showed up after getting a Facebook message, just being like, "Hey, you want to come and do a day of whatever?" And I was like, "Yeah, tell me where to show up,
Sure.
like what time, what planet, like I tell me where to
I'm
go,
there.
and I'll be there. I'm there."
That's awesome.
100%.
That's awesome. Well, so since you're a hired gun, do you do personal work? Do you work with others as well?
I very briefly do, just because the work like load is pretty intense. So
Yeah.
like I'll usually be working every day, all day except for Sundays.
With Walk Off the Earth, or
Yeah.
in general?
Yeah, with walk off. So that's basically my entire week.
Yeah.
But if there's something like I'll call it passion project,
Yeah.
I can usually slice that in the mornings. Like today we have this conversation. And if it
Gotcha.
wasn't this one, it would be, and I usually only do like one thing at a time on the side. So that way I don't, because I really don't have more than a couple hours every few days. So people realize that it's like, if someone asks me something, I'll be like, okay, well, here's the deal. Like I only have X amount of time, so I can't really jump into it that much. But if you're cool with that, then let's do it. So that's kind of how I've done side stuff. It's just like, a couple hours here, a couple hours there, a bit of a Sunday here. It's very, very minimal, but like it's 98% of my time is spent doing the walk-off stuff.
Doing the work, yeah. Beautiful. Do you ever find that you get nervous working with other incredible, talented people like the band?
Not anymore. I definitely did before. But now that it's more like a family, then, no one's nervous to go, have dinner with their family or work with their family.
Fair. So everyone's kind of almost boosting each other, motivating each other to level up and get,
Yeah. The band the band's
get to the
amazing
stage
for
where you
that.
can produce a nice package.
Yeah, the band's amazing for that. They'll always be pushing each other, and especially me. Just be like, "Hey, man, this is good. Like, but like, let's change this, or like, let's do this,
Yeah.
or can I redo this, or can I retrack that?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Like, they'll be the first person to say like, "Don't fix it in the mix," for example. Like, I'll be like, "Oh, I could like tune that. That's fine, or I can comp that." They're like, "Let me just try 2 more takes."
Yeah.
And the rip it, I'm like, "Okay, cool. That just cut out half an hour of editing for me."
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
they're
Record it
pushing themselves and they're
properly
pushing me
and it's
all the
good.
time.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. We do have our grumpy sound guy. He wants to ask you one more question about DAWs.
Yeah.
So you were talking about Logic and Luna and getting back to that. Why do you think people keep using Pro Tools then? Like, is
People keep using Pro Tools because it's kind of like the bike that you've just been riding your whole life, and so there's just really not much of an onus or of there's not much of an incentive to not ride that bike. I mean, like if the chain is maybe not as new or the gear changing is kind of getting rusty or whatever the case, they've done a really good job of trying to catch up with other DAWs who are just a lot more smooth and a lot more new in the sense
how
of the
about what you
features.
said about it having to be renewed all the time and just like not being very
Yeah.
friendly with VSTs and stuff like that?
Right. So, for example, like it has proprietary plugin types, which is kind of weird, which forces developers to have to make a different plugin style just for Pro Tools via AAX. The subscription models, Avid has stopped allowing people to buy perpetual cross grades from their existing perpetual ones. They can only go to a subscription model, which is kind of like saying, if you own a car and they're like, "Do you want a new car seat?" Sure. But if you buy this car seat, next year I own the car. And you're like, wait, what? But that's kind of what they're selling. And it's kind of just a weird vibe. So, like, I don't know what the mood is there, but it's kind of a big mood.
Copy that.
Interesting. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Grumpy, thank you for asking that.
Yeah. Definitely a grumpy answer as well.
Copy that. That's jokes. Tokyo, do you have any final words? We've reached the end here.
I love the baffling and I love the sound attenuation and diffusion behind you, dude. I'm a bit jealous of that.
It's nice, hey?
Yeah.
It's nice.
I
Thank you
need
so
one
much.
of those.
Is there somewhere that our listeners can find you?
Yeah. I mean, you can find the band on YouTube. I think that one goes without saying.
Yeah.
You can find me on mostly Instagram at Friengineer. If you have any trouble finding that, it's friend and engineer together.
Nice. We'll have that in the show notes for sure.
Exactly.
For sure.
100%.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much, listeners. I hope you guys learned a lot today. Shout out to Prevail Media Group, because without the facility, we can't do this. Shout out to our grumpy sound guy. We tell us how you really feel, okay?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then big shout out to Mr. Tokyo Spears. Thank you so much for your time and your energy. We are out here.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening. If you found any value in this episode and you want to learn more from our content, check out our website at goproduce.ca. If you're on Instagram, check out our handle at go.produce. If you're on YouTube, subscribe. If you're on Spotify, hit download. If you're on Apple Music, leave a review. This will all help us grow our community. I'm Big Lou, and this is Go Produce.